She went to Trinidad and Tobago to sell her mansion to save her husband's business. But when she came home unannounced on Christmas, she found her beloved grandmother shivering outside without a blanket, while her millionaire husband's family was laughing and enjoying champagne. What she did next will shock you. Watch the full story. Hi, my most beautiful family. First, let me pray for you. May your nights be peaceful, your mornings be bright, and may every burden on your shoulders be lifted. May your children grow in love and wisdom. May your homes overflow with blessings. And may your hearts never walk alone, for you are always carried by love. Amen. Now listen, my family. I know some of you come here for the first time carrying doubts and trust issues. I understand. But please know, everything I do here is real, born from love, from sacrifice, from the deepest part of me. It hurts me when many of you leave the story halfway. Not because of numbers, but because it feels like my hard work, my long nights, and my heart mean nothing. Still, I cannot be angry with you, because you are my family, and I love you too much. But I want you to remember this. When you stay till the end, you are not only respecting the story, you are holding my hand. You are saying, Mr. Peter, we are with you. That love gives me strength to keep going. If your heart is true, write present. If your love is real, write, I am with Mr. Peter. Let me see my family shining in unity. Let's start together. If I had known that the woman who raised me like a queen would one day be left shivering in the cold by the family I trusted most, I would have burned every bridge to protect her. Olivia Jason's fingers trembled as she held the faded photograph of her one-year-old self, cradled in Michaela Blake's young, hopeful arms, a moment frozen in time before tragedy struck and changed everything forever. The photograph had yellowed at the edges, but the love captured within it remained as vibrant as the day it was taken 31 years ago. Michaela, then just 47, with raven black hair and dreams still dancing in her eyes, gazed down at baby Olivia with the fierce devotion of a lioness protecting her cub. Neither of them knew that within hours of this picture being taken, a drunk driver would steal away Olivia's parents, leaving behind only twisted metal, shattered glass, and a grandmother's unbreakable promise to love unconditionally. But some promises, Olivia would learn, come with a price that no one should ever have to pay. "Grandmother, tell me again how you knew I was destined for greatness," Olivia whispered, settling onto the velvet cushions of her grandmother's favorite chair in their sprawling Manhattan penthouse. The evening sun painted golden streaks across Michaela's silver hair, creating a halo effect that made her look like the angel she had always been in Olivia's life. Michaela's eyes sparkled with the same mischief that had carried her through decades of struggle and sacrifice. "Child, the moment I held you after that terrible night, you stopped crying and looked at me with such determination. Your little fists were clenched tight, and I just knew that nothing in this world would ever break your spirit." The memory hit Olivia like a warm embrace, transporting her back to countless nights when Michaela would work double shifts as a hotel housekeeper, then come home to help with homework, braid hair, and whisper stories of strength and resilience. Every sacrifice had been wrapped in love, every hardship transformed into a lesson about perseverance. What Olivia didn't know was that soon those very lessons would be the only thing standing between her and complete devastation. "You remember the winter when I couldn't afford to buy you that red coat you wanted so badly?" Michaela's voice carried the weight of old regrets and hard-won wisdom. "I worked 3 jobs that month, cleaning offices until my hands bled, just so I could see you smile when you unwrapped it on Christmas morning." "And it was the most beautiful coat in the world," Olivia replied, her throat tight with emotion. "You made me feel like a princess even when we were living in that tiny apartment with the broken heater." Michaela reached out and cupped Olivia's face with hands that had scrubbed 1,000 floors to build a future. That's what love does, baby girl. It takes the broken pieces and makes them into something beautiful. It turns struggle into strength and pain into purpose. The irony of those words would haunt Olivia in the months to come when she discovered that not everyone understood the true meaning of love. The sound of keys jingling at the front door interrupted their moment, and Olivia's heart skipped with anticipation. Jason Halliburton's deep laughter echoed through the marble foyer, followed by the confident stride of a man who owned the world and everyone in it. At 35, he commanded respect in every room he entered, with his sharp jawline, piercing blue eyes, and the kind of smile that had convinced Olivia to say yes to forever 3 years ago. "Ladies, I hope you're ready for a celebration," Jason announced as he swept into the living room, his Armani suit still crisp despite a long day of conquering Wall Street. He moved toward Olivia with the grace of a man accustomed to getting everything he wanted, but when he greeted Michaela, his demeanor shifted to one of genuine respect and affection. "Mrs. Blakes, you look more radiant every day," he said, taking her hand and placing a gentle kiss on her knuckles. The gesture never failed to make Michaela smile, and Olivia's heart swelled with love for a man who understood the importance of honoring the woman who had shaped her world. Little did she know that in just a few short months, this same man would stand by silently while his family treated her grandmother like a servant, unworthy of basic human dignity. "What are we celebrating, sweetheart?" Olivia asked, rising to meet Jason's embrace. His arms enveloped her with the security she had craved since childhood, the promise that she would never be abandoned again, never be left to face the world alone. "The Morrison deal closed today, $30 million in profit, and it's all thanks to my brilliant wife's negotiation skills," Jason announced, spinning Olivia around until she laughed with pure joy. "We're officially in the billionaire club now, baby." Michaela clapped her hands together, her face beaming with pride. "Oh, my beautiful granddaughter, look how far you've come. From that tiny apartment to this magnificent life, it's like watching a flower bloom into something extraordinary." The celebration that followed was filled with champagne, laughter, and dreams of an even brighter future. Jason spoke of expanding their empire, buying a house in the Hamptons, maybe starting a family of their own. Michaela shared stories of her own humble beginnings, weaving tales of resilience that painted their success as something sacred, a testament to the power of love and determination. But success, as Olivia would soon discover, can be as fragile as the heart that fights to protect it. As the evening wound down and Michaela excused herself to rest, Olivia and Jason sat together on their private balcony overlooking the glittering Manhattan skyline. The city sprawled before them like a kingdom they had conquered together, each light representing dreams they had turned into reality through sheer will and unwavering partnership. "Do you ever think about how different life would be if I hadn't met you?" Olivia asked, her head resting against Jason's shoulder as his fingers traced gentle patterns along her arm. "Every single day," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved me, Olivia. Before you, I was just another rich man with more money than sense. You gave my life meaning, purpose. You and your incredible grandmother taught me what real family looks like." The sincerity in his words wrapped around Olivia's heart like a warm blanket, confirming what she had always believed, that their love was strong enough to weather any storm, overcome any obstacle, conquer any challenge that dared to threaten their happiness. If only she had known that the greatest threat to their love would come from within Jason's own family, and that her beloved grandmother would pay the ultimate price for Olivia's trust in people who saw kindness as weakness and loyalty as something to be exploited. As they sat together under the stars, planning a future that seemed as infinite as the night sky above them, neither Olivia nor Jason could have imagined that in just a few short months their fairy tale would crumble, leaving behind only the unbreakable bond between a grandmother and granddaughter and the devastating question of whether love could truly conquer all. The photograph that had started their evening of memories lay forgotten on the coffee table, a silent witness to the innocence that would soon be lost forever. Chapter 2. When Fortune Fades. The call that destroyed everything came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, piercing through the silence of their bedroom like a bullet through glass. Olivia watched her husband's face transform from peaceful sleep to absolute horror as the voice on the other end delivered news that would strip away everything they had built together in a matter of seconds. "What do you mean the accounts are empty?" Jason's voice cracked like a teenager's, his hands shaking so violently that the phone nearly slipped from his grasp. The confident businessman who had conquered Wall Street just hours earlier had vanished, replaced by a broken man staring into the abyss of financial ruin. Olivia's heart hammered against her ribs as she listened to fragments of the conversation. Words like embezzlement, offshore accounts, and federal investigation floating through the darkness like ghosts of their former life. She reached for Jason's free hand, squeezing tight as she watched 35 years of his life's work evaporate in real time. But nothing could have prepared her for what came next, the devastating realization that the man they had trusted most had orchestrated the perfect betrayal. "Vincent Rodriguez, my business partner for 15 years, he's disappeared," Jason whispered after ending the call, his voice barely audible in the suffocating silence of their bedroom. "Every account, every investment, every penny of liquid assets, gone. He even mortgaged our properties without my knowledge, forged documents, created fake investment portfolios." The name hit Olivia like a physical blow. Vincent, who had been best man at their wedding. Vincent, who had bounced their future children on his knee and promised to be their godfather. Vincent, who had eaten Sunday dinners at their table and called Michaela grandma with what seemed like genuine affection. "How much?" Olivia managed to ask, though part of her already knew the answer would change everything forever. "Everything. We're not just broke, Olivia. We're in debt for hundreds of millions. The FBI is freezing all remaining assets pending investigation. We have maybe 48 hours before they seize the penthouse, the cars, even our personal jewelry." Jason's words came out in broken fragments, each one hitting harder than the last. The woman who had built an empire through sheer determination felt the ground crumble beneath her feet. But what terrified her most wasn't the loss of wealth. It was the thought of her beloved grandmother facing poverty again after everything they had overcome together. Dawn arrived without fanfare, painting their luxurious bedroom in pale light that seemed to mock their devastation. Olivia had spent the remaining hours of the night holding Jason as he alternated between rage and despair, his powerful frame shaking with the weight of betrayal that cut deeper than any financial loss. "I trusted him with everything," Jason repeated for the 100th time, his voice hoarse from crying. He knew about every account, every investment strategy, every security code. He had access to it all because I believed he was family. "We'll get through this," Olivia whispered, though her own voice lacked conviction. "We've built something beautiful before. We can do it again." But even as she spoke the words, a cold dread settled in her stomach. They weren't young anymore, weren't starting from zero. They were starting from negative hundreds of millions, with the FBI breathing down their necks and creditors circling like vultures. What she didn't yet know was that this financial catastrophe would reveal the true character of everyone around them, and the results would break her heart in ways that money never could. The sound of gentle footsteps in the hallway announced Michaela's approach, and Olivia's throat tightened with the impossible task of explaining their new reality to the woman who had sacrificed everything to give her a better life. How do you tell someone who scrubbed floors until her hands bled that their fairy tale was over? "Good morning, my loves," Michaela called softly as she pushed open the bedroom door, carrying a silver tray with steaming cups of her famous herbal tea and homemade biscuits. At 78, she still insisted on taking care of everyone else, her nurturing spirit as strong as the day she first held baby Olivia. One look at their faces told her everything she needed to know. The tray trembled in her hands as she set it down, her wise eyes moving between Olivia and Jason with the intuition of someone who had survived enough storms to recognize the signs of devastation. "Tell me," she said simply, settling onto the edge of the bed with the quiet strength that had carried their family through every previous crisis. Jason couldn't meet her eyes as he explained Vincent's betrayal, his voice breaking on every detail of how 15 years of friendship had been nothing more than an elaborate con game. Michaela listened without interruption, her weathered hands folded in her lap as she absorbed the magnitude of their loss. The silence that followed felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, waiting for someone to either pull them to safety or push them into the void. "Well then," Michaela said finally, her voice carrying a calm that seemed impossible given the circumstances. "I guess it's time to find out what we're really made of." Olivia stared at her grandmother in amazement. Here was a woman who had worked 3 jobs to buy a single winter coat, who had stretched every dollar until it screamed, who had built a life of abundance through sheer determination, and she was facing the prospect of losing it all with the grace of a queen, accepting her fate. "Grandmother, we don't even know where we'll live after tomorrow," Olivia said, her own composure finally cracking. "Everything we worked for, everything you sacrificed for, it's all gone. Child, you think I raised you to believe that your worth comes from the size of your bank account?" Michaela's voice carried a gentle scolding that immediately transported Olivia back to childhood lessons about what truly mattered. The most valuable things in this world can't be stolen by any man, no matter how clever he thinks he is. But even Michaela's wisdom couldn't prepare them for the harsh realities that lay ahead, or the cruel awakening that would shatter their understanding of family loyalty. Jason finally lifted his head, and Olivia saw something she had never seen before in his eyes: complete and utter defeat. "Mrs. Blakes, I've failed. I've failed Olivia. I've failed you. I've failed everyone who believed in me. You trusted me to take care of your granddaughter, and instead I've destroyed everything." "Oh, my dear boy." Michaela reached out and cupped his face in her hands with the same tenderness she had shown Olivia throughout her life. "Love isn't about what you can provide. It's about what you're willing to sacrifice. And if you think this changes how much I care about you, then you don't understand the first thing about being part of this family." The tears that had been threatening to fall finally broke free as Jason collapsed into Michaela's embrace, this powerful man reduced to a broken child, seeking comfort from the only person who still believed in his worth. Olivia watched through her own tears as her grandmother worked the same magic she had performed countless times, transforming pain into hope, fear into courage, despair into determination. "We're going to survive this," Michaela declared with the authority of someone who had conquered poverty once before. "We're going to survive it together, and we're going to come out stronger on the other side. Mark my words, this betrayal is going to be the best thing that ever happened to us, because it's going to show us who we really are when everything else is stripped away." Little did any of them know that Michaela's words would prove prophetic in ways none of them could imagine, and that the true test of their family's strength was still to come. As the morning progressed and reality set in with cruel efficiency, they began the heartbreaking process of saying goodbye to the life they had built. Federal agents arrived to catalogue assets, Movers came to pack belongings that would be sold to pay creditors, and lawyers delivered papers that made their financial destruction official. Through it all, Michaela moved with quiet dignity, comforting Olivia and Jason even as she watched her own comfortable golden years disappear. She packed her few precious possessions, photographs, letters, and the recipe book that contained generations of family wisdom with the same careful attention she had given everything throughout her life. "Where will we go?" Olivia asked that afternoon as they stood in their now empty penthouse, the echoes of their voices bouncing off bare walls that had once showcased their success. "My family has a place," Jason said quietly, and something in his tone made Olivia's skin crawl with foreboding. "It's not much, but it's something. My brother Derek owns several rental properties. He says we can stay in one of the smaller houses until we figure things out." The way he avoided her eyes when he mentioned his family sent warning bells through Olivia's mind, but she pushed the feeling aside. They were desperate, and desperate times called for accepting help wherever they could find it. What none of them realized was that accepting Jason's family's charity would be the beginning of an even more devastating betrayal, one that would test the limits of love, loyalty, and forgiveness in ways that financial ruin never could. Chapter 3. Hidden Treasures. Sometimes the greatest treasures are buried in the deepest pain, waiting for the right moment to save us from ourselves. Michaela Blakes stood at her bedroom window, watching federal agents load the last of their seized belongings into unmarked vans, her reflection ghost-like against the glass as she clutched a manila envelope that contained secrets powerful enough to change everything. For 78 years, she had carried the weight of her late son-in-law's final gift, sworn to secrecy by a promise made to a dying man who had loved his daughter more than life itself. But as she watched her granddaughter's world crumble piece by piece, Michaela knew the time had come to break that promise and reveal the truth that could either save their family or destroy the last precious memories they had left. The envelope trembled in her arthritic hands as she traced the faded ink that spelled out, "For Olivia's darkest hour," in her son-in-law's careful script. Marcus Wellington had been more than just Olivia's father. He had been the son Michaela never had, a man whose generosity and foresight had reached across 3 decades to offer salvation in their moment of greatest need. But revealing this secret meant opening wounds that had never fully healed and risking the discovery of truths that some people weren't meant to know. "Grandmother, are you ready?" Olivia's voice drifted through the door, heavy with exhaustion and grief. They had exactly 30 minutes before the federal marshals would escort them from the only home Michaela had known for the past decade, forcing them into the uncertain mercy of Jason's family. "Come in, baby girl," Michaela called, turning away from the window as Olivia entered with red-rimmed eyes and the hollow expression of someone who had lost everything they thought defined them. "I need to show you something that your father wanted you to have, but only when you truly needed it." Olivia's breath caught at the mention of the father she barely remembered, and Michaela's heart broke a little more at the desperate hope that flickered in her granddaughter's eyes. After 31 years, Marcus Wellington was about to speak from beyond the grave, offering his daughter the lifeline she never knew existed. "Daddy left something for me," Olivia whispered, sinking onto the bed beside Michaela with the fragility of someone afraid to hope too much. "Your father was many things, a dreamer, a romantic, a man who believed that love could conquer any obstacle." Michaela's voice carried the weight of old memories and carefully guarded secrets. But most importantly, he was a planner who understood that life has a way of testing us when we least expect it. She placed the envelope in Olivia's hands, watching as her granddaughter's fingers traced the familiar handwriting with reverent wonder. Inside were documents that would change everything, property deeds, photographs, and a letter that contained words of love and wisdom from a father who had never stopped protecting his daughter, even in death. What Olivia would discover in that letter would force her to make the most difficult choice of her life: sacrifice her father's legacy to save her husband's future, or hold on to the past while watching their present crumble to dust. "Trinidad and Tobago," Olivia read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper as she studied the official documents with growing amazement. Daddy owned a mansion in Trinidad and Tobago. Not just any mansion, child, the most beautiful estate on the island, built with love and dreams of a future that was stolen too soon. Michaela reached into a jewelry box and pulled out a small photo album that she had hidden for over 3 decades, its pages yellowed, but its contents still vibrant with memories. The first photograph took Olivia's breath away. A sprawling white mansion with colonial architecture, surrounded by lush tropical gardens and overlooking crystal blue waters that seemed to stretch into infinity. Palm trees swayed in an eternal breeze, and flowering vines climbed every available surface, creating a paradise that looked more like a dream than reality. "My God," Olivia breathed, turning page after page to reveal room after magnificent room filled with mahogany furniture, crystal chandeliers, and artwork that spoke of refined taste and unlimited resources. How did Daddy afford something like this? "Your father wasn't just any man, baby girl. He was Marcus Wellington of the Wellington shipping empire." Michaela's voice carried pride mixed with old grief. "His family disowned him when he chose to marry your mother instead of the society girl they had picked out, but Marcus had already established his own business ventures across the Caribbean." The revelation hit Olivia like a tidal wave, reshaping everything she thought she knew about her family's history. Her father hadn't been the simple businessman she had imagined, but a wealthy entrepreneur who had built an empire of his own before tragedy cut his life short. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come, hidden in the final pages of his letter like a gift wrapped in tears and sacrifice. "Listen to what he wrote to you," Michaela said, opening the letter with shaking hands as her voice took on the cadence of a man speaking across time itself. "My dearest Olivia, if you are reading this, then the world has challenged you in ways I pray you never have to face. But I know, my little girl, you are stronger than you realize, braver than you believe, and more loved than you can possibly imagine. The mansion I built in Trinidad was meant to be our family's retreat, a place where we could escape the world and focus on what truly matters. I never got the chance to take you there, but perhaps this gift can serve a greater purpose than I ever envisioned." Olivia's tears fell onto the faded paper as she read her father's words, feeling his love reach across 3 decades to embrace her in her darkest moment. But it was his next paragraph that would test the very foundations of her character. "Should you ever find yourself in desperate circumstances, know that this property is worth enough to solve any financial crisis you might face. But I pray you will only sell it if doing so serves the greater good, to protect the people you love, to preserve the family we built together, or to ensure that goodness triumphs over greed. The choice is yours, my darling daughter, and I will love you no matter what you decide." The weight of the decision settled on Olivia's shoulders like a crushing burden. Here was the solution to all their problems, the key to rebuilding their empire and securing their future. But using it meant saying goodbye to the last tangible connection to the father she had barely known, selling off a piece of her heritage that could never be replaced. "The property is worth approximately $40 million in today's market," Michaela said quietly, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was revealing. "More than enough to pay off the debts and start fresh. But once it's sold, it's gone forever, along with the dreams your father had of taking you there someday." Olivia stared at the photographs through her tears, imagining what it would have been like to walk those halls with her father, to sit in that garden and listen to his stories, to understand the man who had created this paradise with hopes of sharing it with his family. The mansion represented more than just money. It was a monument to love cut short, a testament to dreams that had died with her parents on that terrible night 31 years ago. But it was also the lifeline that could save Jason from complete ruin and restore the life they had built together through years of love and partnership. "What would Daddy want me to do?" Olivia asked, her voice breaking with the impossibility of the choice before her. "Your father was a man who believed that love was the only currency that really mattered," Michaela replied, wrapping her arms around her granddaughter with the fierce protectiveness that had carried them through every previous storm. "He would want you to choose whatever path leads to the greatest happiness for the most people, even if it means sacrificing his own dreams in the process." The sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway announced Jason's return from his final meeting with the bankruptcy attorneys, and Olivia quickly wiped her tears as she tried to compose herself. "How do you tell the man you love that salvation exists, but only at the cost of everything that connects you to your past?" "Ladies, we need to go." Jason's voice carried exhaustion and defeat as he appeared in the doorway, his once proud shoulders bowed under the weight of failure. "Derek is waiting with the truck to take us to the rental house. It's not much, but at least it's shelter." Olivia looked at the photographs one more time, then at her grandmother's wise, loving face, and finally at her husband's broken expression. In that moment, she understood what love really meant. Not the fairy tale romance of their wealthy years, but the raw, painful willingness to sacrifice everything for the people who mattered most. "Jason, wait," she said, her voice steady with newfound resolve. "I need to show you something. We need to talk about Trinidad and Tobago." The confusion in his eyes gradually transformed into wonder, then hope, then devastating gratitude as she explained her father's gift and the impossible choice it represented. By the time she finished speaking, they were both crying. For the father, Olivia had lost. For the future, they had nearly lost. And for the love that had given them a second chance at everything they thought was gone forever. But neither of them could have imagined the price that Michaela would pay for Olivia's generous heart, or the betrayal that was waiting for them in the shadows of Jason's family's false kindness. Some gifts, they would learn, come with costs that can't be calculated in dollars and cents, costs that are measured in dignity, respect, and the breaking of hearts that have loved too deeply to protect themselves from the cruelty of those they trusted most. As they gathered the last of their belongings and prepared to leave their old life behind, none of them suspected that this moment of hope and possibility was also the beginning of their greatest test yet, a trial that would determine whether love truly could conquer all, or whether some betrayals were too deep to forgive. Chapter 4. The journey begins. The sound that shattered the pre-dawn silence wasn't just a cough. It was the desperate wheeze of lungs fighting for every breath, rattling through the thin walls of Derek Halliburton's rental house like a death knell that would haunt Olivia's dreams for years to come. She bolted upright in the narrow bed she now shared with Jason, her heart hammering as she realized that her grandmother's condition had taken a terrifying turn for the worse. "Michaela!" Jason's panicked shout echoed through the cramped house as he raced toward the tiny back bedroom where Olivia's grandmother had been relegated, their footsteps thundering across the warped hardwood floors that creaked with every movement. What they found when they burst through the door would forever change their understanding of how quickly life could shift from hope to desperation. Michaela sat hunched on the edge of her narrow cot, her usually pristine silver hair disheveled as violent coughing spasms racked her frail frame. Each breath came in short, labored gasps that seemed to scrape against her lungs like broken glass, and the normally warm brown of her skin had taken on an alarming grey pallor that spoke of a body pushed beyond its limits. But it was the flecks of blood on the tissue in her trembling hands that sent ice-cold terror racing through Olivia's veins, transforming their financial crisis into something far more devastating, the possible loss of the only parent she had ever truly known. "I'm calling an ambulance," Olivia declared, already reaching for her phone, with hands that shook so violently she could barely dial. The events of the past week had pushed them all to their breaking points, but seeing her invincible grandmother reduced to this fragile state shattered every remaining piece of her composure. "No, baby girl," Michaela managed between coughing fits, her voice barely a whisper, but carrying the authority that had guided Olivia through every crisis of her life. "It's just stress and exhaustion. I've survived worse than this, and I'm not about to let some temporary weakness stop us from getting back on our feet." The lie was as transparent as morning glass, but Olivia recognized the stubborn pride that had carried Michaela through decades of struggle. Her grandmother would rather suffer in silence than become a burden, would rather pretend strength than admit vulnerability, would rather sacrifice her own well-being than complicate their already impossible situation. What none of them realized was that this moment of crisis would catalyze a decision that would separate the family at precisely the moment when they needed each other most. Jason knelt beside Michaela's cot with gentle hands and desperate eyes, his voice thick with guilt and concern as he checked her pulse and temperature with the careful attention of a man who had come to love her like his own grandmother. "Mrs. Blakes, you need medical attention. This isn't just stress, you're burning up with fever." "I've been working since I was 14 years old," Michaela replied with a weak smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "A little cough isn't going to defeat me now. Besides, we have more important things to worry about than an old woman's complaints." The casual dismissal of her own suffering hit Olivia like a physical blow, highlighting just how much their changed circumstances had cost them all. In their penthouse, Michaela would have had the best medical care money could buy. Now, in this cramped rental house with its broken heating system and thin walls, even basic comfort seemed like an unattainable luxury. "Grandmother, you are not just an old woman," Olivia said fiercely, sitting on the edge of the cot and pulling Michaela into her arms with the desperate need to provide protection and warmth. "You are the strongest person I've ever known, and that's exactly why I'm so scared right now. If you're showing weakness, then something is seriously wrong." The admission hung in the air between them like a prayer, and a fear rolled into one impossible truth. For 3 decades, Michaela had been the unshakable foundation upon which Olivia had built her entire world. The thought of losing that anchor just when everything else had already crumbled was more terrifying than any financial ruin could ever be. But sometimes, the cruelest twist of fate can also become the catalyst for the greatest acts of love and sacrifice. "Listen to me, both of you," Michaela said, her voice gaining strength as she summoned the authority that had commanded respect in boardrooms and broken down barriers throughout her life. "We have been given a gift, your father's property in Trinidad, and we cannot let fear or sentimentality prevent us from using it to rebuild our lives." She turned to Olivia with eyes that still held the fire of determination despite her physical weakness, and in that gaze was every lesson she had ever taught about courage in the face of adversity. "You need to go to Trinidad, handle the sale of that property, and secure our future. This is what your father would have wanted, his legacy used to protect the family he loved more than life itself." "I'm not leaving you like this," Olivia protested, even as part of her recognized the wisdom in her grandmother's words. The property sale required personal attention, legal expertise, and negotiation skills that couldn't be handled remotely. But the thought of abandoning Michaela while she was so obviously ill felt like the worst kind of betrayal. "And I'm certainly not letting her go alone," Jason added, his arm tightening protectively around Olivia's shoulders. "If she goes to Trinidad, I go with her. We're partners in everything, remember?" The look that passed between Michaela and Jason in that moment carried years of unspoken understanding and mutual respect, but it also held a conversation that Olivia wasn't privy to, an exchange that would prove crucial in the days to come. "Jason, my dear boy, your place is here," Michaela said gently but firmly, her weathered hands reaching out to cup his face with maternal affection. Olivia is strong enough to handle the business side of things, but I need someone here to take care of me, to make sure I'm following doctor's orders and getting proper rest. Something flickered in Jason's eyes, relief, gratitude, and perhaps something else that Olivia couldn't quite identify. Of course, Mrs. Blakes, I would be honored to take care of you while Olivia is away. You've both done so much for me, it's the least I can do to repay your kindness. The sincerity in his voice brought tears to Olivia's eyes, reaffirming her belief that she had married a man of genuine character and deep compassion. Here he was, willing to set aside his own pride and comfort to care for an elderly woman who had welcomed him into their family with open arms. If only she had known that his family would view that same elderly woman as little more than a convenient servant whose dignity was expendable for their entertainment. "It's settled then," Michaela announced with the finality of someone accustomed to making difficult decisions. "Olivia will go to Trinidad, handle the property sale, and secure our financial future. Jason will stay here and take care of me, proving once again that he truly understands what it means to be part of this family." The plan made perfect sense from every practical angle, but something deep in Olivia's gut twisted with unease that she couldn't quite identify. Perhaps it was simply the anxiety of leaving her sick grandmother for the first time in 31 years, or maybe it was the intuitive understanding that their family was about to face its greatest test yet. Either way, she couldn't shake the feeling that this decision would change everything in ways none of them could anticipate. Over the next 3 days, they worked tirelessly to arrange Olivia's trip to Trinidad and Tobago. Legal documents were prepared, travel arrangements were made, and detailed instructions were reviewed until everyone understood their roles in the complex process of selling international property. Michaela's condition stabilized somewhat with rest and the makeshift medical care they could afford, but her cough persisted like a constant reminder of how precarious their situation had become. She insisted on helping with the travel preparations despite her obvious exhaustion, determined to ensure that every detail was perfect for the mission that would determine their family's future. "Take this," she said on Olivia's final night at home, pressing a small golden locket into her granddaughter's hands with tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "It was your mother's, and it contains a picture of your parents on their wedding day. Let them guide you through this journey, and remember that love is the only compass you'll ever need." The locket was warm from Michaela's touch, carrying with it decades of love and the weight of family history that stretched back through generations of strong women who had faced impossible odds with grace and determination. "I'll call you every night," Olivia promised, clutching the locket to her heart as she memorized every line of her grandmother's face. "And if your condition gets worse, I'll come home immediately, property sale or no property sale." "You'll do no such thing," Michaela replied with mock sternness, though her smile was filled with pride and love. "You'll handle that business like the strong, capable woman I raised you to be, and you'll come home victorious with the future secured for all of us." The morning of departure arrived with cruel efficiency, bringing with it a mixture of hope and heartbreak that would define the next phase of their journey. As Olivia stood at the airport, surrounded by luggage that contained everything she would need for an extended stay in a foreign country, she felt the weight of her family's expectations pressing down on her shoulders like a lead blanket. "Take care of each other," she whispered to Jason and Michaela, her voice thick with emotion as she hugged them both one final time. "I love you more than words can express, and I'll be back before you know it with enough money to rebuild our lives exactly the way we want them." What she didn't say, what she couldn't have known to say, was that the next time she saw her beloved grandmother, everything would be different, and the love she was counting on to sustain them would be tested in ways that would either destroy them completely or forge them into something stronger than they had ever dared to imagine. Chapter 5. Island of Memories. The first thing that struck Olivia as she stepped off the plane in Trinidad was the overwhelming sensation of coming home to a place she had never been, as if her father's love had somehow infused the very air with memories that predated her birth. The tropical breeze carried scents of frangipani and sea salt that awakened something deep in her soul, a recognition so profound that it brought tears to her eyes before she had even left the airport. But nothing could have prepared her for the moment she first laid eyes on her father's mansion, rising from the hillside like a monument to dreams that had been interrupted but never truly died. The photographs in Michaela's album had been beautiful, but they had failed to capture the raw, emotional power of standing before this testament to a father's love, a place built with the hope of sharing paradise with the family he would never get the chance to bring home. The wrought iron gates stood open as if they had been waiting 31 years for her arrival, framing a winding driveway that led through gardens so lush and magnificent that they seemed to belong in a fairy tale rather than reality. Every tree, every flower, every carefully placed stone had been chosen with the kind of attention that spoke of a man who had planned to create perfection for the people he loved most. Standing at the entrance of this paradise, Olivia felt her father's presence as clearly as if he were walking beside her, guiding her steps toward the home he had built with dreams of the future they would never share. Miss Olivia Wellington. The voice belonged to an elderly Trinidadian man whose weathered face broke into a smile so genuine that it immediately put her at ease. "I am Samuel Rodriguez, and I have been waiting 31 years to meet you." The name Rodriguez sent a chill down Olivia's spine. Vincent Rodriguez had been the business partner who betrayed them, and she wondered if this was some cruel coincidence designed to remind her of their recent tragedy. But Samuel's warm handshake and kind eyes carried none of the deception that had destroyed their lives. "Your father hired my family to maintain this property before you were even born," Samuel explained as he led her up the grand staircase to the mansion's front entrance. "Every day for 3 decades, we have tended these gardens and cleaned these rooms, keeping everything exactly as he left it, waiting for the day when his daughter would finally come home." The revelation that her father had planned for her eventual arrival hit Olivia like a wave of bittersweet emotion. Even in death, Marcus Wellington had been taking care of his daughter, ensuring that when she finally discovered her inheritance, it would be perfect and ready to welcome her with open arms. But the real shock was waiting just inside the front door, where the weight of 31 years of preserved love and hope would bring her to her knees. The entrance hall took her breath away with its soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and polished marble floors that gleamed like mirrors in the tropical sunlight streaming through enormous windows. But it was the portrait hanging above the grand staircase that stopped her heart completely, a family painting of her parents holding a baby who could only be herself, commissioned during the brief months when their happiness had seemed infinite and unbreakable. "He had it painted from photographs after the accident," Samuel said quietly, his voice thick with old grief. "Told the artist he wanted to capture the family he would have had if fate hadn't been so cruel. Every morning he would stand right here and talk to that painting like you were all still with him." Olivia's legs gave out, and she sank onto the marble steps as the full weight of her father's love crashed over her in waves of understanding and regret. This wasn't just a house. It was a shrine to the family that had been stolen from him, a monument to dreams that had been cut short but never abandoned, a testament to love so deep that it had transcended death itself. How could she possibly sell this place? How could she turn her father's heart into mere dollars and cents, even if those dollars could save her husband and secure their future? "There's more you need to see," Samuel said gently, offering her his arm for support as they began a tour that would reveal the depths of Marcus Wellington's devotion to the daughter he barely had time to know. Room after magnificent room had been designed with a child in mind, a library filled with books about adventure and courage, a music room with a piano positioned perfectly for small hands to reach the keys, a playroom equipped with toys that would have delighted any little girl lucky enough to call this paradise home. "Your father spent months designing your bedroom," Samuel explained as he opened the door to a space that looked like something out of a princess fairy tale. He said his little girl deserved to feel like royalty every single day of her life. The bedroom was a masterpiece of pink and gold, with a canopy bed fit for a queen and windows that overlooked the gardens where Marcus had planned to teach his daughter about the flowers he loved so much. Even the closet had been designed with the expectation that someday a grown woman would need space for elegant gowns and beautiful shoes. Standing in that room, Olivia felt the presence of the father she had never known as clearly as if he were standing beside her, showing off the palace he had built for his princess. The love that had gone into every detail was so overwhelming that it threatened to break her heart completely. But the most devastating discovery was still to come, hidden in Marcus Wellington's private study like a message in a bottle cast across the ocean of time. The study was a masculine sanctuary filled with leather-bound books, antique furniture, and the lingering scent of the cigars Marcus had enjoyed during his brief years of happiness. But it was the desk that drew Olivia's attention, specifically the journal that lay open as if her father had just stepped away for a moment and planned to return. "He wrote in that journal every day after the accident," Samuel explained, his voice barely above a whisper. "Wrote letters to you, told you about his day, shared his dreams for your future. Said it helped him feel connected to the daughter he would never get to watch grow up." With trembling hands, Olivia opened the leather-bound journal to a random page and began to read words that would forever change her understanding of what it meant to be truly loved. "My dearest Olivia, today is your 2nd birthday, though you will never blow out candles or open presents. I spent the morning in your garden, planting the roses that I hope will bloom when you finally come home to me. Everything I do here is for you, my darling daughter. Every flower I plant, every room I design, every breath I take is an act of love for the little girl who made my life complete in just one short year." The journal contained hundreds of similar entries, each one a love letter from a father to the daughter who lived in his heart, even though she couldn't live in his arms. Page after page revealed the depth of his devotion, his hopes for her future, his dreams of the day when she would walk through these halls and understand how much she had been loved from the very moment she was born. Reading those words, Olivia felt her father's love wrap around her like a warm embrace, healing wounds she hadn't even realized existed and filling empty spaces in her heart that had ached for 31 years without her understanding why. But it also made the decision to sell the property infinitely more complex, because how do you put a price tag on love itself? "Miss Olivia," Samuel said after giving her time to absorb the magnitude of what she had discovered, "there are people here who want to buy this property, rich developers who want to tear it down and build hotels, investors who see dollar signs where your father saw love. But there is one offer that might interest you. A family who understands what this place represents and wants to preserve it exactly as your father intended." The possibility of finding buyers who would honor her father's memory rather than destroying it offered a glimmer of hope in what had seemed like an impossible situation. If she could sell the property to people who would cherish it the way Marcus Wellington had intended, perhaps she could live with the decision to let it go. As the afternoon wore on and Olivia explored every corner of the magnificent estate, she began to understand why her father had chosen this particular paradise as the setting for his dreams. The mansion sat on a cliff overlooking the Caribbean Sea, surrounded by gardens that bloomed year-round and filled with the sound of birds singing songs of welcome and joy. It was the kind of place where healing could happen, where broken hearts could mend, where a family could find the peace and happiness that had been stolen from them by cruel fate and even crueler betrayals. Standing on the terrace as the sun began to set over the water, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that seemed to embrace the entire world in their beauty, Olivia made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She would sell the property, but only to buyers who would preserve it as the monument to love that her father had intended it to be. The sacrifice would be enormous, letting go of the last tangible connection to the father she had barely known, accepting that she would never again walk these halls or sit in these gardens where his love still lingered in every shadow and every beam of sunlight. But love, she realized, wasn't about holding on to things. Love was about letting them go, when doing so served a greater purpose, even if that purpose came at the cost of your own heart breaking into a million pieces. As she prepared for the complex negotiations that would determine their family's future, Olivia had no way of knowing that back home, her beloved grandmother was facing her own sacrifice, one that would test the very foundations of dignity, respect, and human decency in ways that would forever change their understanding of what family really means. The paradise her father had built with love was about to save them financially, but the price of that salvation would be paid in currency far more precious than money could ever be. Chapter 6. Shadows in Paradise. The transformation began exactly 24 hours after Olivia's plane disappeared into the clouds above New York, as if Jason's family had been counting down the minutes until they could finally drop their masks and reveal the true faces that had been hiding beneath years of carefully constructed politeness. What Michaela discovered that first morning would shatter her faith in human decency and force her to confront a cruelty so systematic that it seemed designed specifically to break the spirit of a woman who had never harmed anyone in her 78 years of life. Well, look what the cat dragged in. The voice belonged to Derek Halliburton, Jason's older brother, whose lips curved into a smile that held no warmth as he surveyed Michaela over his morning coffee with the satisfaction of a predator finally cornering its prey. "I was wondering when we'd get to have a little family meeting about the new living arrangements." Michaela looked up from the kitchen sink where she had been washing the breakfast dishes, a small gesture of gratitude for the roof over their heads, and felt ice-cold dread settle in her stomach as she took in Derek's expression. This was not the face of a man offering charity to family in need. This was the face of someone who had been waiting for the perfect opportunity to exercise power over those he considered beneath him. Behind Derek stood his wife Beverly, a sharp-featured woman whose designer clothes and perfectly styled hair couldn't disguise the ugliness that radiated from her eyes like poison, and flanked around them were their 3 adult children, Marcus Jr., Patricia, and Stephen, each wearing the same expression of barely contained contempt that spoke of a family united in their shared sense of superiority. But it was what Derek said next that would begin Michaela's descent into a nightmare she could never have imagined possible. "Here's how this is going to work, Grandma Moses," Derek continued, his voice dripping with disdain as he used a nickname clearly intended to reduce her to a caricature rather than treating her as a human being. "You're living in my house, eating my food, and using my electricity. That means you're going to earn your keep like everyone else around here." The casual cruelty of his words hit Michaela like a physical blow, but it was the murmur of agreement from the rest of his family that truly broke her heart. These people had sat at her table, had eaten meals prepared with love, had accepted her warmth and hospitality for 3 years, and now they were revealing that it had all been an act designed to hide their true feelings until the moment came when they held all the power. "I understand you need help around the house," Michaela replied quietly, her dignity intact despite the humiliation burning in her chest. "I'm happy to contribute however I can while Jason and I are staying here." "Oh, you misunderstand," Beverly interjected with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "This isn't about help. This is about earning your place. See, we've been talking, and we think it's time someone around here learned the difference between being a guest and being a burden. The words were designed to cut, and they succeeded beyond the family's wildest dreams. Michaela had spent her entire life taking care of other people, had worked multiple jobs to provide for Olivia, had opened her heart and home to Jason without reservation, and now she was being told that her presence was unwelcome, that her very existence was a burden to be managed rather than a blessing to be cherished. But the cruelest twist was still to come, delivered with the kind of calculated precision that could only come from people who had planned this moment with sadistic attention to detail. From now on, you'll be responsible for all the cooking, cleaning, and laundry for the entire household, Derek announced, as if he were a king issuing a royal decree. And you'll do it with a smile, because anything less than complete gratitude would be very ungrateful considering how generous we're being by letting you stay here. The other family members nodded in agreement, their faces showing the satisfaction of people who had found a perfect victim, someone who couldn't fight back, couldn't leave, and couldn't defend herself without risking the safety and security of her family. "And where exactly is Jason during this generous offer of yours?" Michaela asked, her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest like a volcano preparing to erupt. "Oh, our dear brother is out looking for work," Patricia replied with mock sympathy. "Poor thing is so ashamed of losing everything that he can barely stand to be in the same room with us. Spends most of his time driving around, trying to find someone willing to hire a failed businessman with a criminal investigation hanging over his head." The revelation that Jason was avoiding his family, and by extension avoiding her, hit Michaela harder than any insult they could have hurled. The man she had come to love like a son, the man who had promised to take care of her while Olivia was away, was abandoning her to face this humiliation alone. But even that betrayal paled in comparison to what happened next, when the family's true nature revealed itself in ways that would haunt Michaela's dreams for months to come. "There's just one more teensy little thing," Beverly said with false sweetness, her voice taking on the tone of someone delivering the final blow in a carefully orchestrated attack. "We've decided that the master bedroom would be much better suited for Marcus Jr. and his new girlfriend. You'll be moving to the storage room in the basement. It's small, but it should be perfectly adequate for someone in your position." The storage room. They wanted to put a 78-year-old woman who had spent her life caring for others into a basement storage room like she was an unwanted piece of furniture to be hidden away from decent society. The last shreds of Michaela's composure finally cracked, and she set down the dish towel with hands that shook not from age but from fury so pure it threatened to consume everything in its path. "I may be staying in your house," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had raised a granddaughter from baby to businesswoman through sheer force of will and unconditional love. "But I am not your servant, and I will not be treated like one." The silence that followed felt like the moment before lightning strikes, pregnant with electricity and the promise of devastation. Then Derek's laughter filled the kitchen. Not the warm sound of genuine mirth, but the cold, calculating amusement of someone who held all the cards and knew exactly how to play them. "Oh, but I think you will," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow managed to be more threatening than any shout. "Because if you don't like our very reasonable arrangements, you're welcome to find somewhere else to live. I'm sure there are plenty of homeless shelters that would love to take in an elderly woman with no money, no resources, and no family willing to support her." The threat hung in the air like a sword suspended over Michaela's head, and everyone in that kitchen knew that Derek held the power to make good on every word. Without Jason's protection, without Olivia's financial support, Michaela was completely at their mercy, a fact they intended to exploit to its fullest extent. "Of course," Beverly added with mock concern, "we'd hate for Olivia to come home and find out that her beloved grandmother had been forced onto the streets because she was too proud to accept help from family. That might interfere with her concentration while she's trying to save everyone with that property sale." The manipulation was so expertly crafted that Michaela almost admired its precision. They had identified her greatest weakness, her love for Olivia, and were using it as leverage to ensure her compliance with their degrading demands. Standing in that kitchen, surrounded by people who saw her as nothing more than an opportunity to exercise cruelty, Michaela made a choice that would define the next phase of her life. She would endure whatever they threw at her, would absorb their insults and degradation without complaint, because protecting Olivia's mission was more important than protecting her own dignity. But as she picked up the dish towel and returned to her work with shoulders squared against the storm of humiliation that was about to descend upon her, Michaela had no way of knowing that her sacrifice would ultimately become the catalyst for a reckoning that would test every relationship in their family and force everyone to confront the difference between love and loyalty, between charity and cruelty, between the people they pretended to be and the people they truly were beneath the surface. The war for Michaela's dignity had begun, and the casualties would include not just her own self-respect, but the very foundation of trust upon which their entire family had been built. Over the following days, the systematic campaign of degradation began in earnest, with each family member contributing their own special brand of cruelty to the collective effort to break down a woman whose only crime had been trusting in the basic decency of people she had considered family. They criticized every meal she cooked, every room she cleaned, every gesture of service she provided. They spoke about her in the third person while she was standing right there, discussing her as if she were a piece of furniture whose presence was barely tolerable. They assigned her increasingly degrading tasks designed to remind her of her powerlessness and their complete control over her daily existence. And through it all, Jason remained conspicuously absent, showing up only long enough to grab food and disappear again into whatever refuge he had found from the reality of what his family was doing to the woman who had loved him like a son. The basement storage room they had assigned to Michaela was a concrete cell barely large enough for a single bed, with no windows, no heating, and the constant sound of pipes groaning overhead like the building itself was in pain. It smelled of mildew and neglect, and the single bare bulb that provided light flickered constantly, creating an atmosphere more suited to punishment than rest. But even in that degrading environment, Michaela maintained the dignity that had carried her through 78 years of challenges, keeping her small space clean and organized, saying her prayers each night and holding on to the hope that somehow love would find a way to triumph over the cruelty that had invaded their lives. What she couldn't have known was that thousands of miles away, Olivia was working tirelessly to secure their financial future, completely unaware that the grandmother she was trying to save was already paying a price that no amount of money could ever justify or repair. Chapter 7. The Coldest December. Success tasted like champagne and victory, but as Olivia signed the final papers that would transfer her father's beloved mansion to the Rodriguez family, distant cousins who promised to preserve every room exactly as Marcus Wellington had intended, she had no idea that her triumph was being paid for with her grandmother's tears, frozen on the concrete floor of a basement that had become a prison of cruelty and systematic humiliation. $42 million. Announced Mr. James Rodriguez, the family patriarch whose genuine reverence for her father's legacy had made him the perfect buyer despite other offers that were significantly higher. Your father would be proud, Miss Wellington. This property will remain a monument to love for generations to come. The irony would have been crushing if Olivia had known it. While she was preserving one monument to love, the people she trusted most were systematically destroying another. The beautiful, dignified woman who had sacrificed everything to ensure that love could flourish in the first place. Standing in the Trinidad sunshine with a check that would solve all their financial problems, Olivia felt her father's presence one final time as a warm breeze seemed to embrace her with approval and blessing. The sale had taken exactly 40 days, just as she had promised, and she would be home in time for Christmas with enough money to rebuild their empire and restore their lives to everything they had been before Vincent's betrayal. But some things, once broken, could never be restored, and Michaela's dignity was about to become the ultimate casualty of a family's capacity for cruelty that knew no bounds. 6,000 miles away, in the basement storage room that had become her world, Michaela pulled the thin blanket tighter around her shoulders as another violent coughing fit racked her frail body. The concrete walls seemed to absorb what little heat the flickering bulb provided, and the December cold had settled into her bones with the permanence of despair. Above her head, the sounds of Derek's family celebrating echoed through the floorboards like mockery, laughter, clinking glasses, and the cheerful chaos of people who had everything they wanted, while she had nothing but the dignity they were working so systematically to strip away. 37 days. That's how long she had endured their campaign of degradation, marking each sunrise as another small victory in the war to protect Olivia's mission from the knowledge that would destroy her concentration and possibly her future. But on this particular evening, as the family prepared for another of their elaborate dinner parties upstairs, Michaela was about to discover just how deep human cruelty could go when it was unleashed without restraint or conscience. "Grandma Moses!" Patricia's shrill voice cut through the basement like a knife, followed by the sharp staccato of high heels on wooden stairs. "Get up here. We need you to serve dinner to our guests, and you'd better not embarrass us with your pathetic appearance." The command came with the casual cruelty of someone who had grown comfortable with wielding power over another human being, and Michaela closed her eyes for a moment to summon the strength she would need to endure whatever fresh humiliation awaited her upstairs. What she found in the dining room would have broken the spirit of a lesser woman, but Michaela Blakes had not survived 78 years by allowing other people's cruelty to define her worth. The table had been set for 12 guests with the finest china and crystal that Derek's money could buy, creating an elegant scene of wealth and sophistication. But it was the uniform they had laid out for her that revealed the true depths of their sadistic creativity. A black dress with white apron that looked like something from a period drama about servants and masters, complete with a little white cap that was clearly designed to complete her humiliation. "Put it on!" Beverly commanded with the satisfaction of someone unveiling their masterpiece of degradation. "Our guests are expecting to see proper service tonight, and we can't have them thinking we don't know how to manage our help." The words were chosen with surgical precision to cut as deeply as possible, reducing a woman who had raised a granddaughter to greatness into nothing more than hired help whose presence was barely tolerable in polite society. Standing in that dining room, surrounded by the laughter and conversation of people who saw her suffering as entertainment, Michaela faced a choice that would define everything that followed. She could refuse and risk being thrown out onto the streets, or she could endure one more degradation in the name of protecting Olivia's future. The uniform fit like a shroud, and as Michaela looked at herself in the hallway mirror, she saw what Derek's family wanted her to see: an elderly servant whose dignity had been successfully stripped away, whose identity had been reduced to her usefulness in their elaborate performance of superiority. But what they couldn't see, what they were too blinded by their own cruelty to recognize, was that Michaela's dignity came from within, and no uniform could ever touch the core of strength that had carried her through decades of challenge and sacrifice. The dinner party itself was a masterclass in calculated humiliation, with each family member contributing to the systematic effort to remind Michaela of her powerlessness. They spoke about her as if she couldn't hear, criticized her service in front of the guests, and treated her with the kind of casual contempt usually reserved for inanimate objects. "Derek, where did you find such dedicated help?" asked one guest, a portly man whose expensive suit couldn't disguise his obvious satisfaction at witnessing someone else's degradation. "She seems so broken in." "Oh, she's not really help," Derek replied with mock generosity, his voice carrying clearly to where Michaela stood serving soup with hands that shook from more than just age. "She's actually my brother's wife's grandmother. We're just teaching her about gratitude while they get back on their feet." The laughter that followed felt like acid poured directly onto Michaela's soul, but she continued serving with the mechanical precision of someone who had learned to disconnect her spirit from her body as a survival mechanism. It was Marcus Jr. who delivered the evening's cruelest blow, standing up during the main course to make what he called a toast to family values. "To my Uncle Jason," he announced, raising his wine glass with theatrical flourish, "who married so far above his station that he actually convinced himself that trailer park royalty qualified as real family. And to Grandma Moses here, who's finally learning what it means to earn her keep instead of living off other people's charity." The applause that followed the toast was the sound of human decency dying in real time, and Michaela felt something inside her chest crack like ice under pressure. Not her spirit, that remained unbroken, but her faith in the fundamental goodness of people, her belief that cruelty always had limits, her trust that somewhere in Derek's family there was still a trace of the humanity she had once believed in. But even rock bottom, it turned out, had a basement level that she was about to discover. As the evening wound down and the guests prepared to leave, Beverly pulled Michaela aside with the smile of someone about to deliver the final stroke in a carefully orchestrated campaign of destruction. "I hope you've enjoyed playing dress-up tonight," she said with false sweetness that made her words even more poisonous. "Because from now on, this is your permanent uniform. We've decided that having proper help around the house is so much more civilized than pretending you're some kind of family member." The casual erasure of 30 years of love and connection hit Michaela harder than any physical blow could have managed. In Beverly's mind, she was no longer Olivia's beloved grandmother, no longer the woman who had raised a daughter to greatness through love and sacrifice, no longer a human being deserving of basic respect and dignity. She was just the help, disposable, replaceable, and worthy of consideration only as long as she continued to provide useful service to her betters. That night, as Michaela lay on her narrow cot in the basement storage room, still wearing the servant's uniform because they hadn't provided her with anything else to sleep in, she did something she hadn't done since the night Olivia's parents died. She wept for the cruelty that people could inflict on each other when they believed no one was watching or caring enough to stop them. Above her head, the sounds of Derek's family celebrating continued late into the night, their voices loud with wine and satisfaction, their laughter echoing through the house like the sound of victory over someone who had never been their enemy until they decided to make her one. But what none of them realized was that their systematic campaign of cruelty was being observed by someone who still had enough conscience left to be horrified by what he was witnessing. Jason Halliburton, who had finally returned home from one of his long absences to discover what his family had done to the woman he had promised to protect. Standing in the hallway outside the dining room, watching through the crack in the door as they forced Michaela to serve their guests in a maid's uniform, Jason felt something inside his chest collapse like a house of cards in a hurricane. This wasn't charity or tough love or any of the other euphemisms his family might use to justify their behavior. This was systematic cruelty designed to break the spirit of a woman whose only crime had been trusting in their basic human decency. And he had allowed it to happen through his cowardice, his shame, and his inability to stand up to the family that had raised him to believe that power over others was more important than basic human compassion. As he watched Michaela clean up the remnants of the dinner party with the mechanical movements of someone whose spirit had been systematically battered into submission, Jason made a decision that would define the rest of his life. No more running away, no more hiding from the consequences of his family's cruelty, and no more allowing his own shame to prevent him from protecting the woman who had loved him like a son. The war for Michaela's dignity was about to get its first real soldier, and the battle lines that had been drawn would determine whether love truly could triumph over cruelty, or whether some betrayals were too deep to ever forgive. Chapter 8. Christmas Betrayal. Christmas Eve had never felt so much like a funeral until Olivia stepped out of the taxi at Derek Halliburton's house, her heart racing with anticipation to surprise her beloved grandmother and husband with the news that would change their lives forever. $42 million in her bank account and the promise of a future rebuilt from the ashes of Vincent's betrayal. But the scene that greeted her in the weak December sunlight would destroy her faith in human decency and reveal truths so devastating that no amount of money could ever repair the damage they had caused. The first thing that struck her as wrong was the silence, not the peaceful quiet of a family preparing for Christmas morning, but the hollow emptiness of a house where love had died and been replaced by something cold and merciless. The Christmas decorations that adorned the windows seemed to mock the very idea of peace on earth and goodwill toward men, their cheerful lights creating a grotesque contrast with the darkness that had settled over everything she had once believed about the people she called family. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared her for the sight that would haunt her nightmares for the rest of her life. Her 78-year-old grandmother, the woman who had raised her like a queen and loved her with the fierce devotion of a lioness, sitting on the concrete steps of the back porch in the freezing December air, wearing nothing but a thin servant's uniform and shivering so violently that her entire body seemed to vibrate with the bone-deep cold of someone whose spirit had been systematically frozen by cruelty beyond imagination. "Grandmother?" Olivia's voice came out as barely a whisper, her throat closing with horror as she took in the full scope of what had been done to the most precious person in her world. "What are you doing out here? Where's your coat? Where are your warm clothes?" Michaela looked up with eyes that had seen too much suffering, her face gaunt from weight loss, and her silver hair disheveled in a way that spoke of someone who had been stripped of even the basic dignity of personal care. For a moment, she seemed not to recognize her granddaughter, as if the past 40 days of systematic humiliation had erased her ability to believe that rescue could ever come. Then recognition dawned, and with it came tears that seemed to carry the weight of every indignity she had endured while Olivia was thousands of miles away, fighting to save a family that had already been destroyed by the very people who should have protected it. "Baby girl," Michaela whispered, her voice hoarse from the cold and from crying alone in the darkness of a basement storage room where no one could hear her pain. "You came back. I knew you would come back." The relief in her grandmother's voice hit Olivia like a physical blow, followed immediately by a rage so pure and consuming that it threatened to burn down everything in its path. Someone had done this to Michaela. Someone had taken the woman who deserved nothing but love and respect, and had systematically destroyed her dignity for the entertainment of people who called themselves family. But the full scope of the betrayal was still revealing itself, because as Olivia helped her grandmother to her feet, she heard something that would forever change her understanding of cruelty, the sound of laughter and celebration coming from inside the house, where Derek's family was enjoying what sounded like the most wonderful Christmas Eve party in the world. "They're celebrating Christmas while you're sitting outside in the cold?" Olivia asked, her voice deadly quiet, as she wrapped her own coat around Michaela's shaking shoulders. "They're inside drinking champagne while you don't even have a blanket." "It's not their fault, baby girl," Michaela replied with the broken voice of someone who had been trained to accept blame for other people's cruelty. "I was supposed to be cleaning the kitchen after their party, but I started coughing and had to come outside for air. They probably don't even know I'm out here." The lie was so transparent that it would have been heartbreaking if it weren't so infuriating, and Olivia felt her last thread of composure snap like a guitar string under too much tension. Her grandmother was making excuses for people who had clearly been torturing her, still trying to protect the very family that had shown her less mercy than they would show a stray dog. "No," Olivia said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 40 days conquering impossible business deals and was not about to be defeated by domestic cruelty. "This is not your fault, and we're going to find out exactly what's been happening here." What they discovered when Olivia helped her grandmother through the back door would have been shocking if the evidence of systematic abuse hadn't already been written all over Michaela's gaunt face and hollow eyes. The kitchen looked like the aftermath of a feast for kings, with expensive champagne bottles, crystal glasses, and the remnants of what was clearly a Christmas Eve celebration that had cost more than most families spent on an entire holiday season. In the center of it all sat a pile of dirty dishes that reached nearly to the ceiling, evidence that someone had been expected to clean up after the party while the family members retired to their warm beds and comfortable lives, leaving the work to someone they considered beneath consideration. But it was the servant's uniform hanging on a hook by the back door that finally broke through Olivia's shock and unleashed the full fury of a granddaughter who would burn the world down before allowing anyone to treat her beloved Michaela as less than the queen she had always been. "They made you wear that," she said, her voice so quiet that it seemed to suck all the air out of the room. "They made you dress like a servant and clean up after their parties while you were sick and weak and had no one to protect you." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Derek's family's continued celebration in the living room, their voices loud with alcohol and satisfaction as they toasted what was undoubtedly their successful campaign to break the spirit of someone they had decided was unworthy of basic human respect. That laughter, that casual, carefree laughter while Michaela had been suffering in silence just yards away, was the final straw that transformed Olivia from a heartbroken granddaughter into an avenging angel whose wrath would rain down on everyone who had contributed to this systematic campaign of cruelty. "Stay right here, grandmother," Olivia said, her voice carrying a calm that was far more terrifying than any screaming could have been. "I'm going to have a conversation with our host family about the definition of hospitality." What Derek's family saw when Olivia walked into their Christmas Eve celebration would later be described by witnesses as the personification of righteous fury, a woman whose love had been transformed into something so powerful that it seemed to make the very air around her vibrate with barely contained energy. They were all there, scattered around the living room like actors in a play about entitled wealth and casual cruelty. Derek lounging in his leather recliner with a snifter of brandy, Beverly draped across the sofa in a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's cars, and their 3 adult children sprawled in various poses of satisfied indulgence, all of them glowing with the particular satisfaction that comes from having spent weeks systematically destroying another human being's dignity. The look of shock that crossed their faces when Olivia appeared in their doorway was quickly replaced by something far more revealing: guilt mixed with defiance, the expression of people who knew exactly what they had done wrong but were prepared to defend their actions with whatever justification they could manufacture on the spot. "Olivia!" Derek exclaimed with false heartiness, rising from his chair as if greeting a beloved family member rather than someone whose grandmother he had been torturing for over a month. "Welcome back! How was your trip? I hope you were successful with that property sale." The casual tone, the pretense of normalcy, the complete absence of any acknowledgement of what she had just discovered, it all combined to create a rage so pure that Olivia felt as if she were looking at the world through a red filter that highlighted every injustice, every cruelty, every betrayal that had been inflicted while she was gone. "I want to hear about my grandmother's living arrangements," she said, her voice cutting through their pretense like a sword through silk. "I want to hear about the basement storage room and the servant's uniform and the dinner parties where you made her wait on your guests like hired help." The silence that followed was so complete that the ticking of Derek's expensive clock sounded like gunshots in the sudden stillness. They had been caught, and they knew it. But what came next would reveal just how deep their cruelty went and how little remorse they felt for what they had done. "Now, Olivia," Beverly began with the tone of someone trying to explain complex matters to a child, "I think you're misunderstanding the situation. Your grandmother needed to contribute to the household, and we simply found ways for her to earn her keep. It was actually quite generous of us." "Generous?" The word exploded from Olivia's throat with such force that it seemed to shake the Christmas decorations on the mantelpiece. "You call making a 78-year-old woman sleep in a basement storage room generous? You call forcing her to wear a maid's costume while she serves your dinner guests generous?" The mask of false politeness finally slipped from Derek's face, revealing the ugly truth that had been lurking beneath the surface all along. He didn't just dislike Michaela, he actively despised her, and he had enjoyed every moment of her suffering. "Your precious grandmother needed to learn her place in this house," he snarled, his voice dripping with years of accumulated resentment. "We've been supporting Jason's poor choices for years, and frankly, we were tired of pretending that some trailer park matriarch deserved to be treated like royalty just because she managed to raise a granddaughter with expensive tastes." The words were designed to inflict maximum damage, striking at everything Olivia held sacred: her love for Michaela, her respect for their humble beginnings, and her belief that family meant something more than shared DNA and mutual obligation. But what Derek didn't realize was that his cruelty had just unleashed something far more powerful than his petty resentments could ever hope to contain: the protective fury of a woman who had spent her entire life being loved unconditionally and who would move heaven and earth to defend the person who had made that love possible. "Get out," Olivia said, her voice so quiet that it seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her vocal cords. "All of you, get out of this room right now, because what I'm about to say is going to change everything, and you're going to want to remember this moment for the rest of your miserable lives." They didn't move at first, probably thinking that she was just having an emotional outburst that would blow over once she calmed down and realized how dependent she was on their charity. But then they saw her eyes, really saw them, and understood that they were looking at someone who had just discovered a strength she never knew she possessed, and who was about to use that strength to destroy everything they thought they knew about power and privilege and the ability to treat other people as less than human. What happened next would become the stuff of family legend, talked about in whispers for generations, as the moment when love finally stood up to cruelty and delivered a reckoning that no one involved would ever forget. Chapter 9. Paths to Redemption. You want to know what $42 million looks like? Olivia's voice carried the deadly calm of someone who had finally found the perfect weapon to use against people who worshipped money above all else. And as she pulled out her phone to show them the bank transfer confirmation, Derek's family began to understand that they had just made the most expensive mistake of their lives. It looks like the freedom to walk away from people who mistake charity for the right to torture others. The numbers on the screen hit them like a physical blow: more money than any of them would see in their lifetimes, more wealth than Derek's entire real estate empire was worth, more power than they could ever hope to wield through their petty cruelties and social manipulations. In that moment, they realized that the woman they had been treating as a desperate beggar was actually an heiress who no longer needed anything they had to offer. But it was what Olivia said next that truly shattered their world and exposed the ugly truth about what kind of people they had chosen to become when they thought no one with power was watching. Every single day for the past month, while I was working 16-hour days to save this family from financial ruin, you were systematically destroying the most precious person in my world for your own entertainment. Her voice grew stronger with each word, fueled by a righteous anger that had been building since the moment she found Michaela shivering on those concrete steps. You took a woman who raised me to believe in the goodness of humanity, and you tried to break her spirit just because you could. Beverly's face had gone white as printer paper, and she was clutching her wineglass with hands that shook as the full implications of their situation began to dawn on her. They had burned bridges with someone who could have lifted their entire family to heights they had never imagined possible, all for the temporary satisfaction of inflicting pain on someone who had never done them any harm. "Now wait just a minute," Derek began, his voice taking on the wheedling tone of someone who suddenly realized that all the power in the room had shifted to the person he had been targeting. "I think there's been a misunderstanding here. We were just trying to teach her some independence, help her contribute to the household." "Stop!" The single word cracked like a whip, silencing Derek's pathetic attempt at justification with such authority that even his own children flinched. "Do not insult my intelligence by pretending this was anything other than systematic cruelty designed to break the spirit of a woman who committed the unforgivable crime of loving you like family." Olivia's eyes swept across the room, taking in each face and memorizing every expression of guilt and desperate calculation as they realized that their victim had become their judge, and that the sentence was about to be far worse than they had ever imagined possible. "You made her wear a servant's costume," she continued, her voice building to a crescendo that seemed to make the very walls tremble with the force of her fury. "You made her sleep in a basement storage room without heat or dignity. You made her serve your dinner guests while you laughed about how broken in she seemed. You took a woman who deserves nothing but love and respect, and you turned her into your personal entertainment." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Patricia beginning to cry, not from remorse, but from the dawning realization that their actions had consequences they had never bothered to consider. But Olivia wasn't finished. She had 40 days' worth of love and 40 years' worth of gratitude to express, and she was going to make sure that every single person in that room understood exactly what they had lost through their casual cruelty. "That woman you treated like garbage raised me from a baby to a businesswoman through pure love and sacrifice," she declared, her voice ringing with the authority of someone who had finally found her true purpose. "She worked 3 jobs to buy me a winter coat. She cleaned office buildings until her hands bled to pay for my education. She loved me so completely that I grew up believing I was the most precious person in the world. And that belief gave me the confidence to build an empire." The family members shifted uncomfortably as they began to understand that they hadn't just been tormenting an elderly woman. They had been systematically destroying someone whose love had created the very success they had been hoping to exploit. "And when this family faced bankruptcy and ruin," Olivia continued, her voice growing softer but somehow more dangerous, "she offered her greatest treasure, her memories of the son-in-law who died too young, so that we could sell his property and rebuild our lives. She sacrificed her past to secure our future, and you repaid that sacrifice by trying to destroy her present." Derek's bravado was crumbling like a house built on sand, and when he tried to speak again, his voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "Olivia, please, you have to understand, we didn't know about the money. If we had known you were coming back with enough to solve everything. If you had known I had money, you would have treated her better." Olivia's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass, and it carried a contempt so pure that it seemed to poison the very air in the room. "So her worth as a human being was dependent on my bank account? Her right to dignity was conditional on her financial usefulness to you?" The question hung in the air like a sword of judgment, and everyone in that room knew there was no answer that wouldn't damn them further in the eyes of someone whose love they had foolishly chosen to test. It was Marcus Jr. who finally broke the silence, his voice carrying the whine of someone who had never faced consequences for his actions and couldn't understand why this time was different. "Come on, Olivia, she's just one old woman. We can make this right. We can give her a better room, treat her better, make up for any misunderstandings. Just one old woman. Olivia repeated the words with the tone of someone savoring a particularly bitter irony. That one old woman is worth more than all of you combined, and the fact that you can't see that tells me everything I need to know about who you really are beneath all the pretense and politeness. She turned away from them then, as if they were no longer worth her attention, and began walking toward the kitchen, where Michaela was waiting with the patience of someone who had learned to expect nothing and therefore could never be disappointed. "Grandmother," she called, her voice transforming from ice-cold fury to warm honey in the space between words. "We're leaving. Pack whatever belongings they allowed you to keep, because we're never coming back to this house again." The scramble that followed was both pathetic and predictable, as Derek's family suddenly realized that their cruelty was about to cost them everything they had hoped to gain. They followed Olivia into the kitchen like a pack of wolves who had suddenly discovered that their prey was actually a lioness, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of desperate bargaining and hollow apologies. "Wait, Olivia, please. We can work this out. It was all a misunderstanding. We'll make it up to her. You can't just leave." But their words bounced off Olivia like raindrops off a roof, because she had already moved beyond anger into something far more powerful. The absolute clarity of someone who had finally seen people's true nature and would never again be fooled by their masks of civility. "The only misunderstanding," she said without turning around as she helped Michaela gather her few possessions, "was believing that sharing DNA with my husband made you family. Real family doesn't torture elderly women for entertainment. Real family doesn't mistake cruelty for authority. Real family protects the vulnerable instead of preying on them." It was at that moment that Jason finally appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking like a man who had been running for miles and had arrived just in time to witness the destruction of everything he had once called home. His eyes took in the scene, his wife helping his beloved surrogate grandmother pack her belongings while his biological family pleaded desperately for forgiveness they didn't deserve, and the expression on his face revealed the full scope of his shame and regret. "Olivia," he said, his voice breaking with the weight of everything he had allowed to happen through his cowardice and absence. "I tried to stop them. I came back tonight to stand up to them, to protect her, to make things right." 40 days too late," Olivia replied, her voice carrying the finality of a door slamming shut on everything they had once been to each other. 40 days while the woman who loved you like a son was being systematically tortured by the people you should have protected her from. The accusation hit Jason like a physical blow, and he sank against the doorframe as if his legs could no longer support the weight of his failures. He had failed as a husband, failed as a man, and most unforgivably, failed as someone who had been entrusted with the care of the most precious person in Olivia's world. "I know I failed her," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the continued pleading of his family members. "I know I failed you. I was so ashamed of losing everything, so humiliated by having to depend on them for charity, that I couldn't face the reality of what they were doing to her." The explanation was honest, but inadequate, the kind of truth that revealed character flaws too deep to be excused by circumstances or forgiven through simple apologies. As Olivia helped Michaela toward the door, carrying the small suitcase that contained everything Derek's family had allowed her to keep from a lifetime of memories and treasures, she paused just long enough to deliver the final judgment that would haunt all of them for the rest of their lives. "You had a choice," she said, her eyes moving from Derek to Beverly to their children and finally settling on Jason with a sadness so profound it seemed to fill the entire room. "Every single day, for 40 days, you had the choice to be better people than you chose to be. You had the choice to show kindness instead of cruelty, compassion instead of contempt, love instead of power. And every single day, you chose wrong." The truth of those words settled over the kitchen like a shroud, because everyone present knew that she was right. They had been tested, and they had failed in ways that revealed the ugly reality of who they were when they thought no one was watching or caring enough to hold them accountable. "The money I earned selling my father's property will never come near any of you," Olivia announced as she opened the back door to lead Michaela out into the December night. "The life we rebuild will never include people who mistake charity for the right to torture others. And the family we create going forward will be built on love and respect, not blood and obligation." As they walked away from that house of cruelty and systematic betrayal, Michaela leaning heavily on her granddaughter's arm, but walking with renewed dignity, neither of them looked back at the people who had revealed their true nature through 40 days of unnecessary suffering. Behind them, Derek's family stood in the doorway, watching $42 million walk out of their lives forever, finally understanding that some mistakes carry prices too high to ever pay, and some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt, no matter how desperately you wish you could return to the moment before you struck the match. Chapter 10. Love's Second Chance. 3 months after the Christmas Eve that had revealed the true cost of betrayal, Olivia found herself sitting in the sunroom of their new Manhattan penthouse, watching her grandmother tend to a garden that bloomed with the same resilience that had carried them both through the darkest chapter of their lives. The morning light streaming through the windows cast everything in gold, creating the kind of peace that can only come after surviving a storm that threatened to destroy everything you thought you knew about love, loyalty, and the power of forgiveness to heal wounds that seemed too deep for any medicine to reach. But it was the sound of footsteps in the hallway that made Olivia's heart skip with a mixture of hope and hesitation, because those footsteps had been arriving every morning for the past month, carrying with them a broken man's desperate attempt to prove that redemption was possible even after the most devastating failures of character and courage. "Mrs. Blake's," Jason's voice carried through the morning air with the humility of someone who had learned that respect must be earned anew every single day, even from the people who had once loved you unconditionally. "I brought your favorite tea from that little shop in Chinatown and some of those almond cookies that remind you of the ones your mother used to make." The small offerings had become a daily ritual, not grand gestures designed to buy forgiveness, but quiet acts of service that spoke to a man's understanding that love was built through countless moments of thoughtfulness rather than dramatic declarations of remorse. Michaela looked up from her roses with eyes that had regained their spark, but still carried the wisdom that comes from surviving systematic cruelty and choosing grace over bitterness in its aftermath. "Thank you, dear boy," she said, her voice carrying the same warmth it had always held for him, though now it was tempered with something deeper, the careful affection of someone who had learned to protect her heart while still keeping it open to the possibility of healing. "Would you like me to help with the garden today?" Jason asked, his hands already reaching for the gardening tools, as if staying busy could somehow balance the scales of everything he had failed to do when action mattered most. It was a question he asked every morning, and every morning Michaela's answer revealed a little more about the complex process of rebuilding trust after it had been shattered by abandonment and cowardice. The 3 months since Christmas Eve had been a masterclass in the difference between punishment and consequences, between revenge and justice, between the easy path of cutting people off completely and the harder work of creating space for genuine redemption to take root and grow. "Jason," Michaela said, setting down her pruning shears with the deliberate care of someone about to deliver wisdom that had been earned through suffering. "Sit with me for a moment. There's something I need you to understand about forgiveness, and about the work that real love requires when it's been tested by betrayal." He settled into the chair beside her with the careful movements of someone who had learned not to take any kindness for granted, his eyes fixed on her face with the desperate attention of a student whose entire future depended on understanding the lesson being offered. "I forgave you the moment I saw you sleeping on the floor beside my bed," Michaela began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent a lifetime learning how to transform pain into wisdom. "Not because you deserved it, and not because what happened to me wasn't devastating and wrong, but because holding on to anger was poisoning the very love that had sustained me through 40 days of systematic cruelty. The words hit Jason like a physical blow, and Olivia watched from the doorway as her husband's face crumpled with the weight of understanding just how much grace he had been given by someone who owed him nothing but contempt. "But forgiveness," Michaela continued, "is not the same thing as trust. Forgiveness is a gift I give myself to free my heart from bitterness. Trust is something you must rebuild through consistent action, day after day, choice after choice, until the person who abandoned me in my darkest hour becomes someone I can rely on, never to abandon me again." The distinction was crucial, and Olivia felt her own understanding of their situation shift as she recognized the wisdom in her grandmother's approach. This wasn't about pretending the betrayal had never happened or minimizing the damage it had caused. This was about creating a path forward that honored both the pain that had been inflicted and the possibility that people could genuinely change when they were forced to confront the true cost of their failures. "Every morning when you bring me tea," Michaela said, her weathered hands reaching out to cup Jason's face with the same maternal tenderness she had shown him during their happiest times, "you're not just bringing tea. You're showing me that you've learned the difference between convenience and commitment, between comfort and courage, between being sorry about consequences and being transformed by understanding." The tears that ran down Jason's cheeks were the kind that come from a soul being rebuilt from the ground up, and Olivia felt her own heart crack open with the possibility that maybe, just maybe, their family could emerge from this crisis stronger than it had been before the testing began. "I dream about those 40 days every night," Jason whispered, his voice breaking with the weight of memories that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "I dream about coming home and finding you in that basement, dream about seeing you in that uniform, dream about all the times I drove past the house because I was too much of a coward to face what my family was doing to the woman I should have been protecting with my life." "Good," Michaela replied with surprising firmness, though her touch remained gentle. "Those dreams are the price you pay for learning who you really are when everything comfortable is stripped away. The question isn't whether you'll carry that guilt. The question is what you'll build with it." It was at that moment that Olivia stepped fully into the sunroom, her heart full of love for both of these people who had been wounded by the same betrayal but were finding different ways to heal from the damage it had caused. "Grandmother is right," she said, settling into the chair on Michaela's other side with the grace of someone who had finally learned to balance justice with mercy, accountability with compassion. "The man who abandoned you during those 40 days isn't the same man who's been sleeping on our doorstep every night for the past month, refusing to leave until he's proven that he understands what love actually requires." The admission was both an acknowledgement of the progress Jason had made and a recognition that their marriage would never again be the easy, comfortable partnership it had been before they were tested by poverty and the true nature of people they had trusted. "But it will be stronger," Michaela said, her voice carrying the prophetic authority of someone who had lived long enough to see love tested and refined by fire until it became something that could survive any storm. "Love that has been broken and rebuilt is always stronger than love that has never been challenged, because it's built on truth instead of assumptions, on choice instead of convenience, on commitment instead of comfort." The months that followed became a testament to the transformative power of second chances earned through consistent action rather than hollow promises. Jason didn't just apologize, he became a different man, one whose understanding of family had been forged in the crucible of nearly losing everything that mattered due to his own failures of courage and character. He learned to cook Michaela's favorite meals and served them with the reverence of someone who understood that every act of kindness was both a privilege and a responsibility. He learned to anticipate her needs before she expressed them, to offer support without being asked, to show up consistently even when showing up was uncomfortable or inconvenient. Most importantly, he learned to stand up to people who mistook his kindness for weakness, his humility for surrender, his commitment to family for something they could exploit or manipulate. When Derek called 6 months later, desperate and humbled by financial troubles of his own, Jason's response was swift and final. "The woman you tortured is now the queen of this family, and anyone who wants access to our lives must first prove they understand that her dignity is non-negotiable." The transformation wasn't just personal, it was foundational, creating a new understanding of what family meant that would guide every decision they made for the rest of their lives together. By their 4th anniversary, the penthouse had become a sanctuary where love was expressed through daily acts of service and protection rather than grand romantic gestures. Michaela held court in her sunroom garden, dispensing wisdom to the young business leaders who sought her counsel and the family friends who had learned that her approval was the highest honor their social circle could bestow. Olivia's business empire had grown beyond her wildest dreams, built on the foundation of confidence that came from knowing she was loved unconditionally by the 2 people who mattered most. Every deal she closed, every barrier she broke, every success she achieved was a testament to the power of being raised by someone who saw potential where others saw limitations. And Jason had become the man he was always capable of being, but had never been forced to become, someone whose strength was measured not by his ability to accumulate wealth or command respect, but by his willingness to serve the people he loved, even when no one was watching or rewarding him for his efforts. "Do you ever regret it?" Olivia asked one evening as they sat together in the garden, watching the sunset paint the Manhattan skyline in shades of gold and crimson that reminded them of happier times and promised even better ones to come. "Regret what, baby girl?" Michaela replied, her hands busy with the evening flowers that bloomed only in darkness, creating beauty that most people never saw because they weren't willing to stay awake long enough to witness the miracle. "Forgiving him, giving us another chance, believing that people can really change after they've shown you who they are when everything falls apart." Michaela was quiet for a long moment, her weathered hands still working among the night-blooming flowers as she considered a question that went to the heart of everything they had all learned about love, loyalty, and the courage required to build something beautiful from the wreckage of what had been destroyed. "I regret the 40 days, she said finally, her voice carrying the weight of memories that would never fully fade but had been transformed from sources of pain into sources of strength. "I regret the basement and the uniform and the loneliness of believing I had been forgotten by the people I loved most. But I don't regret the choice to forgive, because forgiveness taught me something I never knew about the power of love to heal wounds that seemed too deep to survive." She looked up at them then, her eyes bright with the wisdom that comes from surviving the worst that people can do to each other and choosing to believe in their capacity for redemption anyway. Love that survives betrayal becomes something different than love that has never been tested. It becomes a choice you make every single day, a commitment that's stronger than comfort, a bond that's deeper than blood or convenience or even happiness. It becomes the kind of love that can move mountains, part seas, and turn broken people into whole families. As if to punctuate her words, Jason appeared with a tray of tea and the almond cookies that had become his daily offering, his movements carrying the quiet grace of someone who had learned that the most important work happens in small moments when no one is keeping score. "I brought extra tonight," he said, settling onto the ground at Michaela's feet with the comfortable intimacy of someone who had earned his place in their family through consistent love rather than accident of birth. I thought we might celebrate the anniversary of the day we all learned what love really means. The anniversary of Christmas Eve, the day that had seemed like the end of everything, but had actually been the beginning of something far more beautiful and resilient than anything they had lost. As they sat together in their garden sanctuary, sharing tea and cookies and the comfortable silence of people who had learned to treasure every moment of peace they could create together, none of them mentioned the checks that arrived every month from Derek's family. Desperate attempts to buy forgiveness that were returned unopened because some things can't be purchased and some relationships once broken by systematic cruelty can never be repaired no matter how much money you throw at the damage. Instead, they celebrated the family they had rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal, stronger and more beautiful than anything they had lost, rooted in truth and watered with the kind of love that can survive any storm because it has already survived the worst that people can do to each other and chosen to bloom anyway. In the distance, the city lights sparkled like stars brought down to earth, a reminder that even in the darkest places, there is always light for those who know how to look for it, and courage enough to nurture it until it grows into something that can illuminate the world.